Today, Ivan will be taking a session on management. You are doing it wrong. So let's get started. So Ivan, over to you.
All right, good, I think, afternoon for most people. I am speaking to you from, well, not so sunny Melbourne right now. It's a little bit late. What are we at? No, it's not quite 7 o'clock. For those of you who have been to Australia, Melbourne is the land of great coffee, but terrible weather. And for the next half an hour or so, 45 minutes, we will be talking about management and business management and agile management and all that entails. And it entails quite a lot. And I'm going to tell my story. And I'm going to talk about what it means to be a bad manager. Because we don't all start as good agile managers. It's a skill that I think not many people learn. And I'm going to make sure there is plenty of time for Q&A. I'm going to ask, please add questions to the chat as we go along. I will be keeping an eye on the chat as best I can. And what you get out of this session is what you put in. Right? So if I touch on a topic that you really want to dive into, right, please put that question in the chat. And if it's possible, right, I may even dive into that topic as we talk. And the one thing I always say is, if you're thinking something, if you have a question, odds are someone else has the same question or a similar question. So please ask, and do not be concerned about that. We'll definitely make sure there is formal time for Q&A at the end, at least 15 minutes. So as you come along, if you have questions, you want to save them to the end, please do so. And because it's one big room, everyone is in the same space, I'll ask you to unmute yourself, ask your question as quickly as you can. We don't have a lot of time, and go through that. So thank you. Thank you all for joining, and thank you all for just taking an interest in both your careers and Agile in general. So where is my screen? Sharing screen. There we go. So let's talk about Agile management. And specifically, as was pointed out, management, you're doing it wrong. Now, what we're going to be exploring is mean to be an agile manager, and why is that vital for business agility and agile more broadly. And let me start by giving you a story, and it's the story of the one person who cannot object, and that's me. So I'm going to go back to 2008. 2008 was the first year that I became an executive. And before then, I'd run teams, I'd run projects, I'd even run my own small company. This was based in Canberra, Australia, and did data warehouses. So for those of you who are familiar with big data and data warehousing, that's what we did. It was a small company, 10, 15 people at a maximum. Now, in 2008, I had the opportunity to join the Australian Public Service. I closed down my company, which is a story for another day about like how companies fail. But I had the opportunity to join the public service as an executive director. Now, this was a role that I had sort of never had before, but the opportunity was exciting. It certainly paid better than running your own small business. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's find a new challenge. But here's the thing. This was my first time running a section. This was my first time running a large-scale division with shared accountability for, was a $35 million initiative, or series of initiatives, I should say. And we were working on sort of this whole of government data sharing program. I can't say too much about what it was that I was doing, but it was very expensive and a lot of coordination across multiple business functions. It was a strategic initiative. And I'd never done that before. But why did I get the job? If I'd never done anything of that scale, I got the job because I was a subject matter expert, right? Because I could clearly articulate how to deliver on a project of this scale. I could articulate what the architecture needed to be, how the systems could interact, right? I could articulate how and this was Agile, by the way. So I could articulate around test-driven development in data and SQL, which was pretty rare at the time. But I think most of all, I got the job because I was confident, because I could walk into that interview and say, yeah, I can do this job. I know what I'm doing. But the problem is, right, I wasn't. I didn't know how to do the job. Now, there's a concept that you may be familiar with called the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle is the fact that people rise to their level of incompetence. And that means, right, I was a pretty good team leader. I was a pretty good manager. Right? I was a good project manager, but I wasn't a good executive. And that's kind of where this story truly starts, because I didn't even necessarily know that I was a bad executive. So my failing, my mistake wasn't actually that I was a bad manager. My mistake was that I was arrogant, right? I assumed that I could be a good manager. And the problem is, I'm not alone, right? I'm going to guess that inside every single one of your organizations, right, there are managers and possibly even the majority of managers who have reached their level of incompetence, who have, because these companies hire people based on their competence in the primary skill that they are accountable for, and they then get promoted into an executive or a leadership role. But that is a vastly different skill set. Right? No one taught me that it was a skill set. Right? It was something that I had to learn, and I learned the hard way. Right? And this is systemic. I think every person sees their manager, and we think that we could be a good manager. We could be a better manager than they are. Right? We don't see the hard work and the skill that management really requires. Now, we know what bad management looks like, right? But you know what? We would be a great manager if only someone would give us a chance, right? But somehow management is the only skill that we think this about. We wouldn't look at a doctor. We wouldn't look at a nurse or an engineer or even a builder, right, and think, I can do that job. No, we look and we know that these roles, these skills require training, they require experience, right? And if you were to change career, if you were to go and try and become a builder or a nurse or an engineer, you would expect to go and learn. Yet we look at our boss, we look at our manager, and we go, I can do that job, right? And I think I can probably do it better. And you know what? If they have reached their level of incompetence, maybe you could do it better, right? But here's the thing: better is not the same as good, right? Just because you're better than a bad manager doesn't mean you're a good manager. And we know, what's the stat? There was a career builder survey that said that 58% of managers do not receive any management training when they take on that role. And it's a skill. And if you don't receive any training in a new skill, right, of course we're going to have bad managers. Right? And this is this sort of false journey towards management. And it leads to the worst excesses, right? The worst behaviors that we see in management pretty much all over the world. Right? So number one, micromanagement. Right? That's where a leader, a manager needs to know what you're doing, where a manager needs to shape how you're working and what you're working on. And actually, sorry, as a side note, when we talk about agile organizations, we talk about cross-functional teams, right? Multidisciplinary teams, right? And this is great because one of the problems we have in a traditional hierarchy, where in a traditional hierarchy, your manager is your skill superior, as in they are better at your primary job than you are. A junior developer reports to a senior developer, who reports to a dev lead, who reports to the head of development, and so on and so forth. And in this functional hierarchy, your manager should, hopefully, be better at that primary skill, right, than you are. Right? That's just the nature of how it works. So it leads to that manager wanting to micromanage because they can do your job better. Of course they can do your job better. They've been doing it for 10 years longer, right? But the role of the manager isn't to do your job better. It's to help you do your job better and to be better, right? And that's where micromanagement comes in, because unless you have that understanding, right? If I want you to be better, I'm just going to tell you what to do. And if you do what I say, you must magically become better. Right? What else? Right? We have presenteeism. This behavior where people think they have to be in the office, they have to be seen, right? In order to be taken seriously. And so we see managers who work like 10, 12, 14-hour days. Do they do 10, 12, 14 hours worth of work? Not really. Right? Maybe they have 10, 12, 14 hours worth of meetings, right? But that's different from actually delivering work. Right? But this behavior of presenteeism also then leads to, there's a concept coming out of Silicon Valley called hustle porn. And it's basically this culture that glorifies long working hours. Right? And the idea that if you're not overworked, right? If you're not putting everything in your life into this role, then it's somehow you're lesser. Right? And I know I complain about overworking, we all do, right? But it's not a culture to be admired, but these bad managers do, right? And of course, meetings, right? Death by meeting. And there are different kinds of meetings. There are planning meetings, there are decision meetings, there are status meetings, there are performance meetings, 1,000 different types of meetings. But in many cases, the excess of meetings that managers organize is a form of risk avoidance, right? They don't need to make a decision because the meeting can make the decision. So if nobody makes the decision, nobody can be held accountable for that decision, right? Because it was done by the group, right? It doesn't mean it's a good decision, right? It's just pure risk avoidance. And I'm not saying that these bad managers are bad, right? Or evil, right? In many cases, they don't even know that they are bad managers. All of these patterns, micromanagement, presenteeism, those glorified long working hours, are subconscious management avoidance techniques. They exist so that we can, so as a manager, we don't have to consciously face doing the hard work and making the mistakes and almost sort of admitting to ourselves that maybe we're not as good in this job as we should be. Right? And to go back to my story, this was where I was. I didn't know I was a bad manager. Right? I was happily doing my things and doing what I could. I think the worst part of this, right, the absolute worst part of this is that it is, how do I put it? Good managers, right, because of because these anti-patterns of management are so prevalent, they are expressed by so many people, so many other managers, that good managers who don't have these behaviors think that they are bad managers because they don't. Right? They suffer imposter syndrome. Right? They don't want to micromanage. They want to go home and spend time with their family and have a work-life balance. But because all these other managers around them don't, they sort of feel like, in fact, they're almost forced into these anti-patterns just because of that, the culture of management that exists. But there is good news, right? And that is that management is a skill, right? And like all skills, management can be learned. And this is where agile management starts to come in. So it can be learned through training. It can be learned through self-directed learning. It can be, you can read great books. You can follow thought leaders. You can sort of come together as like management peers, like cohorts who learn from each other and lift each other up. There are many, many different ways that you can create or you can become a better manager or help managers to become better and coach them to be better. These days, I run a research organization called the Business Agility Institute. We're a community organization. We have members all around the world, about 63 countries now. And my job is to try and highlight and promote what does an agile organization look like, and what is good management in one of those organizations. So based on our research and based on the work that we've done, right, we know what good management looks like. We know the characteristics of a good manager. Oops, that is the wrong slide. Why is that there? Give me a second. Because I pressed the wrong button is why that's the wrong place. Yes, there we go. So we have, as in a traditional organization, you have a top-down hierarchy. You have command and control. You have management through direction. Right? As we shift towards agile organizations, which are cross-functional, right? Which are hierarchies are based on products or on customer experiences, where leadership and management is based on influence and persuasion. Right? I'm going to give you 5 key skills that you as managers and leaders, or you as coaches, need to instill in those managers inside your organization. The first is the skill of delegation. Now, let's be clear. I'm not talking about delegating work. I'm not talking about going to someone and say, developer Amit, I need the following product or the following user stories finished by Friday. Right? That's one form of delegation, but that's what we call delegation, delegating outputs, work. It's the wrong kind of delegation. What we want is delegating outcomes. We want a culture where that same developer doesn't get told what user stories need to be done by when, right? But has a clear vision of what are the business objectives and has the autonomy and the ownership in that work in order to deliver it, right? And as a manager, your job, right, my job, is to enable those people in that organization, those developers or those testers or those marketers or accountants, right, to both understand the outcomes and to develop the skill, right, to take ownership. Because interestingly, you can't just delegate. You can't just say you now own a business outcome. You need to give them the support and train them on how to take ownership and accept that outcome. We want people to feel that sense of Dan Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? And a large part of delegation is to instill those concepts, right? To instill that concept of autonomy, right? And we know that, and this is from our research, we know that teams and individuals who take ownership have both higher employee engagement scores and reduce wasted effort on key initiatives. We did a study that looked at employee engagement in mature agile organizations, and the key word there is mature. And we found that there was an average of 24% higher employee engagement scores versus those organizations that were either immature agile organizations or not agile at all. So at the whole, right, this outcome delegation is vital, right? And it's also driven by the fact that your teams, right, your developers, right, your operations staff, they are the ones who are the closest to the customer, right? They're the ones with the greatest operational knowledge. So when it comes to making these decisions, right, in many cases, in many organizations, they're actually the right people to make decisions. Especially right now, COVID-19, we're in a situation where we need to make strategic decisions, operational decisions, right, every day and adapt. And though, if you have the skill of delegating outcomes and those people have the ability to make those decisions, they will make better decisions, right, because they are closer to the market than, sadly, you can as a manager. So Peter Drucker says, or said, I should say, we want to reach the point where everyone sees themselves as a manager. I'm just reading this so I get this right. And accepts for themselves the full burden of what is basically managerial responsibility. Responsibility for their own job and work group, for their contribution to the performance and results of the entire organization, and for the social tasks of the work community. Right? We want to have that situation where, right, everyone feels that. So that was number one, skill number one, delegating outcomes. Skill number two, the skill of instilling purpose, right? And purpose is important. There's been a lot of research on the importance of defining and communicating purpose to both employee engagement and customer impact, right? And a prerequisite, it is a prerequisite to delegation, right? Good managers need to actively and constantly invest time to both communicate the vision and clarify the vision. Right? It creates alignment between teams, right? And if you know how your work aligns to the vision, and if you know how your peers' work aligns to the vision, we have a much greater cross-team alignment as well. And we know that if you have a disconnect between teams, especially if those two teams are part of the same customer value stream, we know that that fundamentally breaks, right, the agility in the organization. And we know that it causes significant failure, product failure. 30% of organizations cite that collaboration, communication, coordination failure as the single greatest challenge they have to executing their company strategy. And the simple act of being able to communicate the vision and your part in the vision is vital. The third skill of an agile manager is the skill of strategic agility or agile strategy, or sometimes also called adaptive strategy or emergent strategy. This skill, especially right now in the world of COVID-19, is vitally important for all managers. Gone are the days of creating a strategic plan. I don't think there's any organization on the planet in any country, in any city, whose strategic plan from January, it was active in April. Right? Within 3 months, all that effort that went into defining their strategic roadmap, gone. So those organizations who had strategic agility, who had gone to the Agile gym, who had the muscle memory to make strategic decisions on insufficient information in a changing marketplace, right? While COVID-19 was an order of magnitude more disruptive and complex and ambiguous than any other market disruption in the last 10 years, 5 years at least, right? Those organizations that had that strategic agility muscle memory, they were the ones who survived. They were the ones who thrived. Right? A lot of companies survived, but they thrived because they knew how to do it. Those organizations that didn't know how to do it, well, they still had to make strategic decisions every day, right? Because remember, the world was changing, disrupting. The market was changing and disrupting. So you had no choice but to make strategic decisions every day. But if you hadn't practiced strategic agility, if you didn't know how to make those strategic decisions, then, well, your strategic decisions were disconnected from each other, generally poor, and in many cases took you off the edge of a cliff. Right? And therein lies the problem. So strategic agility as a specific domain of business agility is one of those skills that we need, both as managers that we need, and you need to teach your managers. Right? A lot of you here are going to be Agile coaches. Right? And as Agile coaches, if you're not able to get the leaders in your business unit, if you're not able to get them to think strategically but agilely at the same time, then a lot of the transformational work that you do is not going to actually be effective. So, skill number 4, the skill of people development. Now, you're all here because you want to learn, right? And I respect that. That is amazing. Now, hopefully, some of you are here because your manager, right, supports you in coming and learning and becoming better, for at least those of you who have managers and aren't independent. Right? And in a better case, hopefully they even paid for you to come. Right? Right? However, in many cases, that's not the case. Right? Where if you want to come to a conference, you have to take leave from your job. Right? You have to pay for it out of your own pocket. Right? And again, an Agile organization, one that thrives, is one that invests in growing their people, because the skills of tomorrow are different from the skills of today. And we need people with the skills of tomorrow. Now, it goes beyond skills. It goes beyond capability. A good manager, a good Agile manager, is one who invests time and money in helping you to become the best possible version of yourself. Right? So we sometimes call that complementary skills and behaviors. So if you're a developer going on a Java course or a Maven course or an automated testing course, right? Docker course, whatever, right? Great, fantastic. Let's improve your skills. But I also need you to go and learn how to communicate better, how to negotiate better. I need you to learn how to manage time more effectively, manage your personal stress and mental health more effectively, because these are all facets of you as a human being. And if you don't have that totality of yourself being developed, then, well, you are not stable. You're, as an organization, as an individual in an organization, those other complementary skills are going to, or the lack thereof, will bring you down. And likewise, someone with those complementary skills is going to be much, much more effective in their role. We also know that 79% of people who quit their job cite lack of appreciation and lack of development as their reason for leaving. Right? And this sort of fits under the bad management category. So there is a financial benefit to literally, right, developing the skills of people. We also know that improving the engagement of people. We know that improving, sorry, I said the wrong thing. We know that improving the skills of people and investing them as people has a corresponding impact to employee engagement, right? Managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores across different business units, right? Not the work, not what they do, but the management skill of the people who are above you. And if you are unhappy in your role, right, odds are, right, it's because of your manager. We also know that it improves overall productivity. Right? Once people who have developed those complementary skills and have a broad skill set beyond just their job description, right, increase flow across in terms of the workflow by over 50%. In some cases, right, we're seeing like a nearly 80%, 90% improvement in overall flow, because these are people who know how to solve problems. There are fewer bottlenecks in the whole system. Right? So, getting towards the end here. Number 5, the skill of continuous learning. Now, as I said, we're a research organization, so we published the Business Agility Report for the last 3 years. And in last year's Business Agility Report, we reported that a culture of relentless improvement and continuous learning is one of the top 3 predictive indicators for successful business agility. Now, we haven't announced this yet because we're launching the 2020 report in about 2 weeks. But I can say, right, and you're pretty much the first people to hear this, I can say that relentless improvement is, again, this year, gone up. It was the 3rd predictive indicator. It is now the 2nd top predictive indicator for business agility, right, across hundreds and hundreds of organizations. So if you have this culture, then we are pretty confident that you're an agile organization. A good manager is going to inculcate that culture of learning. It's going to inculcate experimentation and feedback and make it safe to fail. Right? We want managers who can enable and fund your ability to both improve what you do and how you do it, right? Because this is such a it is so vital, not just to agility, but to pretty much every facet of an organization. Now, this is just the start. There are many, many more skills that managers need, and we can talk about them during a Q&A, and we can talk further as we go. But what I wanted to do was share these and give you some insights, get you thinking about what it means for you, right, to be an agile manager, right? And it doesn't matter your role, right? If you're a scrum master, right, then you have some management responsibilities. If you're an agile coach, you may not have direct management responsibilities, but you should be coaching managers into these as well. So these are fundamental capabilities that are needed inside your organization. Now, what about me? Right, let's go back to 2008. Right, I was not a good manager. Right? I didn't know this. I thought I was doing fine. It took a great manager above me, right, to point out my limitations and to point out my arrogance, right, because I was very arrogant. And the phrase that we would use in Australia is to pull your head in or pull your head out, depending on who's saying, right? So he made it very clear that I was not a good manager. I was not a good executive, right? And the reason why he was a good manager, a great manager, is that he helped. I'll be honest, I was not receptive to his feedback the first time he told me that. No one likes being told you're not good at your job, right? And it took me a while to be receptive. But once I did, right, once I realized where I was failing personally, I got better, right? Because once you know where those gaps are, it's a skill, and skills can be learned. So today, right, I've learned what it means to be a good manager. I've learned what it means to be a good leader. Right? Equal parts of confidence. Yes, I had confidence. Empathy. I had empathy, right? And competence, right? Skill, which I didn't have. Right? 2 out of 3 was not enough. Right? Now, with those 3, right, together with all these skills I've been speaking about, right, I believe I am a good manager. I am continuously learning though, right? New skills all the time, because it is a continuous learning journey. Today, I'm running a community and a research organization. And I'll be honest, being a manager of a community organization is vastly different to being a manager of a consulting practice, or before that in the public service. Right? So I'm actually learning what it means to be a good manager all over again in an entirely new context. And I've made mistakes, and I will continue to make mistakes. But I'm loving every mistake that I make, because I know that it's an opportunity for me to get better as a manager, to get better as a leader. And I sincerely hope that all of you, right, can take some of these ideas back to your organization and help people understand what it means to be a good manager. So on that, I've been watching a little bit of the chat. So interestingly, unfortunately, the way screens work, the chat kept hiding behind everything. So I was missing it. So we have a couple of questions. Maybe I'm going to go. Rishi, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure, Evan. So my question is, if you're not the subject matter expert, you cannot lead, and hence become an agile manager, especially in IT industry. Do you think that this statement or premise is true or false?
False. Very, very, very false. So a couple of reasons. So first of all, the role of a manager isn't to do your job. The role of a manager is to enable you to do your job. Now, if you're a developer, you need a senior developer as a mentor. You do need someone better than you to learn from. But that's not necessarily, in fact, in many cases, it's actually preferable not to be your manager. Right? Your manager is accountable for outcomes, right? And whether you use a particular coding standard or a different coding standard, right? That's not your manager's job to say A or B, right? They're there to help you find out what you need to learn, what you need to develop, and to help create that alignment, and of course, make sure things are happening in a timely fashion. Right? They don't need to know, they don't need to be an expert in your skill set in order to do that. There's a saying, it's like surround yourself by people better than you. Right? If you want to be a good manager, surround yourself by people better than you. And I personally, right now, I have a head of research who I don't even understand half the things he says, right? But he is the head of research because he's fundamentally better at research than I am. Now I know the outcomes. I know the impact that we want to have as a community organization to our members and to the broader community. So if he starts going down one track and it's like, no, hang on a second, come back, right? Because what you're talking about doesn't relate to our customers, right? To the audience. It might be interesting, but it's not relevant. I can say that, not because I'm an expert in research, but because I know strategically, right, what our customers need. Right? And the same with our head of marketing and so forth, is I don't need to be an expert in marketing to know like whether our marketing is being effective. Right? So and to be fair, if I was an expert in marketing, I would probably, right, be helping her with the marketing, right? But that's not what I should be doing. I should be helping her to become better at marketing. And that's the difference. Does that make sense?
It does. Thanks, Evan.
And I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. Satyavat. Do you want to ask your question? Unmute.
Satyavat.
Yeah. Hi, Ivan. It's just an observation that how we think about the management practice, how the way as an individual change, we think about our own self, our own perception about what we exactly do as a manager. So that is something you have given us, that change of mindset, how we think about our own role, individual role. That is what I think is challenging the 200 plus years of management practice and perception,
Mm-hmm.
So again, the continuous learning part was really, really interesting. And thank you so much. I've been following Business Agility Institute, all the research, so much interesting journey. Thank you so much for having such a great learning.
Thank you. I will add one thing to that. So continuous learning it's a vital skill, and we talk about it a lot, but it requires a level of openness. And one of my flaws as a person is, and obviously it's something I've been working on for decades, is a level of arrogance, an assumption that oh, I know this, right? And I suffer from this. Like I'll go to a conference and it's like, oh, I don't want to hear, I'm not going to go to that talk because I've heard it all before. Right? There's nothing new for me in that talk. I've been doing Agile for it's 2003 is when I started. So what's that, like 17 years? Right? And yet, you know what? When I go to some of these talks, even some of the basic talks, I go, that's a new way of looking at it. And just being able to just put aside the arrogance, just assume that you know everything, can sometimes be quite hard. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Kieran, do you want to ask me a question? You'll need to unmute if you're trying to talk.
Yeah.
There we go.
So my question was, what is the most difficult decision you have made as a manager, and what are the key points you consider while making such decision? Thank you.
What is the most difficult decision I've had to make as a manager? I've made a lot of difficult decisions. So I was going to say that the most difficult decision I had to make was laying off staff and closing down my company, right? My first company. And I'm also going to say that wasn't the most difficult, and I'll come back to why I'm going to correct myself, but I was going to say it was the most difficult because it was emotionally very stressful. These were people who were friends. These are people who I'd worked with for years and who trusted me. And it was such a real painful experience, and it was painful for them as well. But while that was my first answer, it's the wrong answer. And the reason it's the wrong answer is this was a decision that I had no choice in, right? It was hard because my ego was hurt. I'd failed. I failed at this company that I'd been running for 5 years. Right? Sure, I could have blamed global financial crisis. This was 2008, right? And there's a whole bunch of things I could have blamed, but at the end, it's that ego hurt. Right? Plus, I don't like hurting other people. I don't like where other people feel bad. And here I am telling friends that I'm sorry, we have to close the business down. Right? But I didn't have a choice. It wasn't a hard decision because it was the only decision. The hard decisions is when you have options. The hard decisions is when you have to choose what not to do. And it may not be as impactful as closing a company or firing people, but even just that point where you've got something that you're passionate about. It's like, I really want to do this. It's interesting, it's fun, it's exciting, but I can't do it because something else that's boring and monotonous is more important. And putting aside that excitement, the next exciting thing, and going, no, we've got to focus on the hard stuff, the boring stuff. Right? I've got to spend that time. That's honestly some of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, right? Just because no one else can make it for me. And going back to my combat meetings, right? If I have a meeting of 20 people, right, and a decision is made in the meeting, it's out of my hands, right? If they decide X, then X happens. So, but that's an abdication. You're avoiding management responsibility. The hard part is when, as a manager, you've got to make a choice, and you have to commit to that choice, and that is always the hardest decision. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I'll take that as a yes. Amit asked a question in the chat, but he does say his speaker has the issue, so he won't be able to speak. Hello, Evan. To be a good doctor, one needs both skills and tools. Can you suggest any tools that can help a manager be a good manager? That is a tricky question because, like all good consultants, the answer is it depends. And in many ways, it depends on the kind of manager and the kind of context in which the manager operates. I would say that beyond the skills that you learn, right, a manager needs to be able to use whatever tool is available. So if you, I'll just use a very, very basic example, right? If you are a development manager, you're in charge of a product, right? Low level, right? You're a team leader or a team leader plus one, right? Very, very straightforward. Right? You work for one company and you're using Jira over here and a particular stack to help manage. When you move to another organization and you get given an entirely different set of tools, you've got to be able to use them effectively and efficiently within days, right? So in the same way, a doctor has some amazing tools, but when a new tool comes out, right, they've got to learn to use the new tool. It's a lot harder and they have to get certified and all that kind of thing, but it's kind of the same principle. It's not about what is the best tool. It's about being able to learn to use whatever tool is necessary and whatever tool is available. I will also say, and I used to be a developer, so I'm kind of biased about this, but I really think that managers need to learn scripting, like JavaScript, or at least like Google Script or something, because I have automated so many parts of my jobs in the past. I haven't cut code for pay for like 15, 17 years. But just being able to write some JavaScript to automate something, you have no idea how easy it makes some management roles. Oh, and Excel. Oh, you need to be an Excel god to to be a good manager. The ability to process data and look at stuff in different ways, can't go past that. Anyway, I'm rambling, but yeah, my answer to that one is to make sure you are able to learn new tools quickly.
So maybe one last question.
There we go. Time for one last question. There's a lot of good questions. Victor, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, Victor, you can.
Please. Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Yes, please. Well, as what I wrote there. So thanks, Evan, for your time. First and foremost. So I'm from Singapore. My question to you is, yeah, in my experience at least, and I think this is fairly common across organizations today still, that the majority of people managers, those with direct reports, somehow yearn the formal authority that comes with the position. And this, this is manifested in the traits of ego, arrogance, the inability to delegate outcomes, and so forth, right? And their resistance towards, empowerment or, in general, right? All of these things that really are impeding teams from becoming self-organizing in the first place, right? And, and all of that. So, I mean, my question to you is, over time, the organization ends up becoming a tyranny. So how do you coach managers and organizations out of this mindset?
Okay, so
I think your video has frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just that your video has frozen.
So there's, hopefully it'll come back in a second. There's a concept which I recommend everyone Google called the 16 basic desires, right? It is a model of human motivation. And one of those motivations is status. One of those motivations is power, right? And interest and honest here, my top motivation is actually power, right? Now, power is the desire for influence, right? The desire, like it's about being in a position that you can influence others. Like that is actually one of my, no, it's not one of my, it is my top desire. I'm being very open and transparent here. Status, right? Desire to be held in regard by other people, right? And there's 16 of them, right? So that's an entire different conversation. But what is interesting about this is how managers, right, translate their desires into that role. So there's a psychological concept called transference. And if you want to create an agile organization where it's flatter, there's less hierarchy, there's less there's just less hierarchy and stuff. Right? If you want to create that kind of organization, then you've got to be able to transfer that ego from that position of authority to something else. Maybe it's status, right? Maybe it's these managers want to be recognized in some particular way. So let them speak at conferences, let them express that status in other ways. Maybe it's an ability, the desire is about saving, right? Maybe it's the money, maybe they haven't, there's other ways that they can save. Maybe it's about acceptance. Right? They have a community, their mother-in-law. They want to be accepted by their family group, which requires a level of position. So how can you give them that, help them achieve that desire without necessarily creating that position of ego? Now, obviously, yes, there are people who are like sociopaths and are in the role just to be better than everybody else. And right? So hopefully those people will won't enjoy working for an agile organization and will leave, because that's not the behavior that is dominant. So being able to move people's motivations is a key capability, a key skill in both an organizational transformation and specifically when it comes to managers in a position of authority with ego. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So I think I caught two of the key points there. The first is essentially to give them an outlet, an alternative outlet, right? From that, but from the direct authority that comes with the original formal authority that comes with that position. And
that's it.
Because and the
second, you can't, you can't just take away their position, right? Because their ego is attached to it, right? And the ego is not something you're going to change. So you have to find that new outlet if it's going to be successful.
Got it. And that relates to the second point that I picked up. And I believe what you were alluding to is that ultimately the organization exists as a social construct on its own. And the reason why I raised this is because you said, I mean, ultimately there are sociopaths, right? And if that social construct, which by virtue of being an agile organization does not support, then that person would leave, right? And you don't encourage such behaviors over time.
Spot on, 100%. Yes.
All right.
And
thank
organizations are constructs. So.
All right. Thank you, Evans. That's very enlightening. Thank you for your time.
Victor. And thank you, everyone, for your great questions. I know I'm about 1 minute over time. Apologies. Amit,
yes.
Back to you, I think.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ivan, for your time, for a wonderful session.